Good morning, Matt. Thank you for your time. I know around Anzac Day you must be very busy, so it's great that the Starts at 60 community could chat to you today.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here, Wendy. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Now, we know that you've spent over 20 years, following in the footsteps of our troops and people, that have fought and died on battlefields around the world. And I'm sure that many people are just as curious as I am as to how did you become battlefield historian?
It's a really great question, and it's a complicated answer, but I think I just grew up. I grew up in a small country town, and so every Anzac Day we would go out and I'd join the march with my school, and my dad would march in the town band, and my grandfather had served in the Second World War, and his brother had been killed in the Second World War. Right. So I think I grew up in an environment that just recognised the importance of not forgetting and service and sacrifice. But that was just the starting point. As I got older, it went from, as I like to say, it went from an interest to a passion to an obsession. And I just knew that I had to, do something in this field. And I've always been particularly drawn to the landscape and to the battlefields as they are today. And so as I've been fortunate to grow my career as a military historian and do lots of media work and send people on tours and all sorts of things, the one area I focus on is walking the ground. So I like to think that my contribution is translating what you can read in the history books to what you can see on the ground today. So I'm really fortunate that I get to do this as a career and lead lots of people around the battlefields.
Absolutely. And on that note, I'm sure, we know that you've led a lot of people, and I'm sure that you have so many stories. It might be a really great way to kick off if you could maybe share one really memorable moment for you that you can remember of one of your tours that you've experienced.
Yeah, probably the most moving moment. This was back in the early days when I was personally leading all the tours myself. But I remember I'd led an Anzac Day tour, and there was maybe 30 people in the group, and some of them had family members they were following, and this was to France and Belgium for Anzac Day. Some were following family members, some were just there because they were simply interested in learning more about the military history. But I remember there was one bloke on the coach, and he was a Vietnam veteran. He was a big bloke, and he was difficult. Let's be honest, he was a difficult passenger. He complained about everything. He didn't get on very well with the rest of the people on the group. He was traveling on his own, and I just noted from the first day that he was a bit of a challenge. And even though he had a good appreciation of what we were doing, it was just that sort of bloke. He was a rough and tumble bloke and didn't fit in well with the group. But I knew that he had a relative who died during the war, and as part of the service we like to offer, if there's a grave within the sort of tour area, we like to go and visit it. So we took him. I think his name was Noel. I don't think his name was Noel, but we'll call him Noel.
Noel.
We'll say Big Noel. Noel, I knew he had a relative. The cemetery was within the tour area. So one day, for no other reason, we just stopped at the cemetery, and like always happens, I said to the group, we're just here for a few minutes so Noel can visit the grave of his relative. And everyone got off the coach, and like they always do in this situation, they usually accompany the passenger to help them, and here's we found the headstone. It was the most incredible moment, Wendy. He stood in front of that grave, and then he knelt down on one knee, and he put his hand on the grave, and he started to weep. And he just started to cry. And I don't know what the backstory was with his family and his parents, but I think it was his great uncle. So it was someone he obviously never knew in his lifetime. He was born decades after this man had died.
I don't know why I'm getting emotional. I don't know Big Noel.
But it was just one of those incredible moments. And he was saying, I'm the first. He sort of stood up. He said, "Oh, sorry, I'm the first one to do this." And it meant a lot to my dad. And there was obviously a whole backstory that I didn't know. But that meant so much to him, and that seeing his family name on the headstone meant so much to him. And I think it was even more special the fact that he had been difficult, hard to get on with, and just to see that emotion come gushing out of him, and that's what it does. You can't help it. Every person, whether they've got a family member or not, just cannot help but be connected when they walk the battlefields and see those headstones, as you are right now. I mean, it's stories you just can't escape from, and it's an incredibly emotional experience.
Absolutely. Now, one of my later questions, which on that point, I'll actually bring it forward a little bit, is actually from one of our community members who, when we were promoting one of the Mat McLachlan tours, they actually asked if one of our relatives' graves, for example, on the Western Front or a place that you visit, is there an opportunity to include it in the tour? And I would imagine that it's going to depend on a number of things, but perhaps we could hear from yourself what that usually looks like or what the process is.
Yeah, that's a very standard request. It's a very standard part of our service.
Yep.
The only caveat I would say is if it's possible, because there's more than, if we say let's just focus on France and Belgium, the World War I battlefields. There's more than 2,000 Commonwealth cemeteries, plus hundreds of memorials with names on them, and many of them are not in the battlefield area. So because a lot of them were set up around hospitals in the rear area. So sadly, men who were wounded died of their wounds, were buried in hospital. A lot of men are buried in England, for example. They made it all the way back to England and then sadly passed away from their wounds in England. So what we say is we will absolutely do it if we can do it. So if it's in the tour area, which lots of them are, the majority of cemeteries are in the tour area. If it's in the area where the tour is going and we have time in the itinerary, we absolutely do that as part of our service, because visiting the grave of a relative, and the other thing we say to people is it has to be a relative. It can't be an old boy from my school, someone on my local war memorial. You know, if it's we just run out of time. But if it's a relative and they've died and they're on a memorial or in a cemetery, we will do everything we can to go there, because it's not just for the passengers whose relative it is, for everyone on the tour, like the story of Big Noel. Yes, incredible. That was the highlight of the tour for everyone. Just an incredibly emotive experience. So it actually, rather than being a hindrance to the tour, it actually adds to the experience for everyone.
I can imagine. Creates that connection even more. Yeah. So
we call them pilgrimages on the tour. So we say, we're going on. We've got a pilgrimage stop.
I love that,
because that's what it is. That's what it is. It's a pilgrimage, which people have been doing since the end of the war. Families have been going and visiting the battlefields, and those of us from Australia who are lucky enough to get over there are often completing a journey that families didn't get to do. So it's a very special part of the trip. Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, the timing of this conversation is around Anzac Day. Is it commemorations like those sort of dates that generate the interest in revisiting, the past on a tour, or is there some other sort of trend or reason that you see as to why people might jump on one of these tours?
Yeah, I think it's a big part of it. I think we sort of divide our tours into what we would call like a flagship tour. I mean, that's the wrong word for it, but I think you get what I mean. I think when people are going to Europe in particular, so half of our passengers that we do in a year go to France, because it's such a key battlefield. Turkey is also very popular with Gallipoli, Vietnam, places like that. But if we just talk about France, I think people are either going, I think Australians need a reason to go to Europe. Aussies do very long trips around Europe. They'll do 6 or 8 weeks easily. But they need a hook. They need a reason to say why we're going. So that might be, my cousin Bob's wedding. It might be to visit family that I haven't seen in years. It might be the Rugby World Cup, like we saw last year, or an Ashes tour, a sporting event, or it might be something like Anzac Day, which is the reason that they're going. So we have these longer tours, which we would call our flagship tours, like Anzac Day, and a lot of people are going for that reason. And there's obviously a lot of promotion around Anzac Day and a lot of interest in the story around Anzac Day. But the majority of our passengers don't go on any of those big dates. They just go because they're going to be in France, for example, and they want to go and visit the battlefields, which is why we also have a lot of shorter tours that enable people to travel to sort of bolt them onto their holiday. So it's a mix of both, which is why we accommodate everyone who wants to go over there and walk the ground.
Now, your tours are led by historians. How does that make it different when you're on the ground? Can you tell us a little bit about how they make that sort of come to life?
Yeah, that's by far the most important aspect of the touring experience. So basically, it's Mat McLachlan Battlefield Tours, but I can't physically lead every tour. But the two things I do to ensure that it lives up to the standards that we've set is I design every itinerary. And I handpick the historians that lead the tours. And so we've over the past 15 years, we have an incredible team. We've got more than 60 historians that work for us around the world, and they're incredible people. They know this stuff. They know it a lot better than I do. They know it inside and out.
I guess they've got their specialties, I suppose.
Yeah, that's right. And they spend every day doing it. They walk around pretty much every day. So they know, not only do they know the history really well, but they know the landscape really well on the ground that they're going. And they talk to each other, and they're always finding new things. Oh, if you go down that road, there's something great to see.
Right, yep.
And that's by far the number one aspect. And I mean, if people want to go to battlefields, they don't have to go with our company. They can drive themselves, or they can do it in many other ways. But having a historian that knows their stuff really changes the experience. Because if we go even a battlefield like Gallipoli, where there's a lot of terrain that is the same as it was in 1915, so much went on that ground. You're not going to know what happened there simply by just walking around or driving yourself around. You can get a guidebook or look on the internet, but it's not the same as having someone there who can bring that history to life. And that's what we say. That's fine. Too, right? Sorry.
The storytelling always, it just makes it come to life.
Very, very true. We focus a lot on the personal experience of the soldiers. So it's important to understand the strategy and why we were there and the politics. And that's important to have a general knowledge of what was going on. But the part of the battlefields that most sort of touches the heart is the personal experiences of the blokes on the ground. And so that's what we try to bring to life. And again, it comes back to what I said at the start of our interview, that what I think my hopefully contribution is translating what you read in those history books to what you can see on the ground. And there's no doubt that that's the number one objective we're looking for in a historian. And our historians are absolutely brilliant. So it's, that people absolutely rave about them, and they do bring that history to life.
Yep. What are your view on people bringing grandkids? Do you think it's something that's, have you seen great outcomes from people taking, because obviously the Starts at 60 community, a lot of our community, they are grandparents and they do want to, I guess, pass down the stories of their families. Sort of what experiences have you had with, I guess, multi-generational families traveling together in the past?
We've had a lot of fantastic experiences with multi-generational trips, and I would absolutely encourage everyone to bring their children and grandchildren, provided they're old enough. Obviously they have to be old enough to understand what they're looking at. It's not like a holidaying on the beach in Fiji where there's lots of activities. It is a lot of touring around and listening to talking and things like that. So if you've got teenage kids, I'm doing a tour later in the year, and my 16-year-old son is coming with us.
Oh, wow.
It's a bit of work experience, basically. So he'll be there with the group helping out, because he's just reached the age now in the last year or so where he understands it and he's really interested in it. He's studying it at school, and I think he always thought I was just a little bit odd before that I had this interest in old battlefields. But he's now of that age where he is really starting to get interested in it as well. So I think by the time you've got kids that are 14, 15, 16 or grandkids, that's a good age. If they get it, you don't want to be there with someone if they're dragged along with a teenager or an adult. You want to make sure that people actually want to do it. But if you've got a teenager who is interested in the Anzac story, who does get it, and it's absolutely fantastic. And young people bring a very different perspective that I think those of us who are a little bit older overlook sometimes. We often have people on tours who are the age of the men who died.
Wow,
And so they have a very interesting perspective on it, and particularly, without wanting to wander too far off track, but we live in a relatively peaceful age. So if you're a 18 or 19-year-old, there's not very much prospect that one day the government will say, here's a rifle, go off and fight for your country. And that's a fantastic thing. That is a wonderful thing that previous generations didn't have. And so I think it's fantastic that they get reminded of that as well. And when they confront that, when they see, we've had 18-year-olds who see an 18-year-old soldier on the battlefield, and it's confronting. They think, oh my God, this could have been me. But through a luck of the year I was born, this could have been me. And it gives the whole group a new perspective on just the people that are fighting.
No, that's fantastic. I love that. And just to finish up, Matt, we Travel at 60 is promoting the Bombing of Darwin tour that is, I believe there's a commemoration next year in 2025, February 25. So we're currently communicating all about that tour to our audience and giving them the opportunity to come with us and do one of your tours. So could you tell the audience a little bit about that and how traveling to Darwin during that time and I guess just a bit about the tour and why, they should come and join us.
Thank you to everyone who's going to come on that tour. It's a very special one. I've done it several times myself, and it's a bit of a unique one, the Bombing of Darwin tour, because it's the only regular tour we do in Australia. Usually we're sending people to France and Turkey and Vietnam. But this one's in Australia on our own doorstep, and that reflects what went on in 1942. Australia was under threat for the first and really only time in our history where we had the Japanese attacking Australia. And that's a really important part of our history. It's one that's easy to overlook, and Darwin is a place where you can go and remember that and pay your respects. So the interesting thing about this tour is it's not typically the best time to go to Darwin. February
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
the wet season, or the green season, as they now
Yes.
call it.
Yeah.
But I think that's part of the experience as well,
Yeah.
because that's what the people went through. So
Yeah. True.
the history is on the 19th of February 1942, Japan launched a huge attack on Darwin. And it was actually the same aircraft carriers that had attacked Pearl Harbor 10 weeks earlier, attacked Darwin, and caused huge death and destruction, and sunk a lot of ships in the harbor, and probably 250 people were killed. It's a really moving and very special tour to go on. And then on the 19th of February every year, there's a big commemoration up there. And there's just so much to see from the Second World War. It's not the first thing you'd think of when you think of Darwin. You probably think more of crocodiles and kakadu and all that wonderful natural history they've got up there and natural areas to explore. But there's a lot of World War II history and fantastic museums that tell the story, incredible memorials that to the people who died. Adelaide River War Cemetery, a little bit inland from Darwin, has hundreds of graves of people who died in all aspects of the fighting in Northern Australia. Seamen whose ships were sunk, and airmen who died in plane crashes, and but also the civilians who died in the bombing of Darwin. Yeah. So it is a really moving experience to do it. And the groups tend to be a little bit smaller. It tends to be only 20 sort of people that would go on a group like that, and they form very strong friendships on that tour while exploring this war history. And we've got some fabulous historians that lead that and bring the story to life. So it's just a really great experience. Close to home. It's relatively inexpensive compared to the big long European trips. I think the tour is only 5 days, so it's pretty quick. You can fit it in easily to your travel plans, and it's just a really great Australian experience. It's a moving experience. Take your tissues, because there are going to be some pretty sad stories as well, but it's a really moving experience. So we love hosting people to Darwin every year. It's one of our favourite tours that we offer.
Great. Awesome. Well, you're going to have lots of Travel at 60 community members on the February 25 one. So we're all looking forward to that. Matt, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. Well, I know certainly I've loved hearing your storytelling, and I know that definitely translates through to the way that you and your team run the tours. So great talking to you today. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Wendy. It's a real privilege to take people to the battlefields, and I'm just very lucky we get to do it. So thanks for your time.